You are listening to the It's Your Time podcast, and I'm your host, Certified Life Coach Michelle Arnold Burke. In today's episode, I am sharing a best of replay interview with the author of Fear is Fuel, Patrick Sweeney. Welcome to the It's Your Time podcast, the podcast where busy professionals like you get the practical solutions and support you need to gain control of your schedule so you can strive to be the best in your career, but without the stress and overwhelm. If you're looking to increase your energy and decrease your stress, you are in the right place. Hello. Welcome back to the podcast, friends. How are you doing today? We're getting towards the end of summer. Is everyone kind of getting ready to get back into routines and schedules and all of the goodness of fall? Don't worry, I am not pushing it. I'm not a crazy pumpkin person. I enjoyed the summer, but I also can see what the calendar is doing to us. So what I wanted to do today is something I have actually never done before. I am sharing a best of replay. The thing is, I am finding myself over the past couple of weeks going back, rereading a couple of books that I just love, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to re-share an interview for folks who maybe have just joined recently and maybe missed the episode 80 it was, where I had a conversation with Patrick Sweeney. He is the author of Fear is Fuel, The Surprising Power to Help You Find Purpose, Passion, and Performance. And it just felt so fitting because I have been working with a bunch of folks recently who are interviewing and looking at new jobs and trying to figure out like what the process is and how to go about it. And some of the feedback that I've heard is, I don't know if this was a couple months ago, if I would have actually gone for this. And what I want to say to that is, don't listen to your brain. Go for what you want in life. This is what Patrick talks about, using fear as a way to really accelerate and live your life and using fear as fuel. Fear is fuel. It is such an interesting conversation, and it's not just a woo-woo type of conversation. We talked about brain science, and he talked about really having facts to back up what he talks about in the book. So without further ado, I will say, please enjoy and take a listen. Thank you so much because I love this book. I feel like there are so many concepts that I talk about on the podcast. I was like, yes, underline. Before you released the book, how were you able to get the information that you have about neuroscience out there?
Well, the biggest thing I was doing, I spent 6 years researching and I started talking to neuroscientists just for myself, because I was wondering how in my life I went from being like the world's biggest wimp to all of a sudden Captain Courageous. And I'm wondering what happened and how the structure of my brain changed at 35 years old. And so I started to, it happened just purely by luck. I was doing a charity century bike ride, 100-mile bike ride on Mother's Day, and almost 7 years ago now, and ended up getting in a groove, after about 20 miles with a group of guys, and started talking. One of them was a neuroscientist at Tufts, and so I asked him the question, here's what happened to me, here's my story, how did it happen? And he said, well, come on into my lab, and next week we'll have a coffee, and I'll explain a little bit about the brain. And so he told me something, and I said, wow, this is really fascinating. I never knew that. And he said, well, if you like this, you should go to Harvard and talk to Scott Orr, because he's doing some amazing things around PTSD, and he's shown how, we can help veterans and people who've had trauma. So I went and talked to Scott. And so this started a trail of neuroscientists recommending me to other neuroscientists, because normally their work is so, dull and scientific and it's not accessible to most people. And what happened was, after maybe 4 or 5 of these interviews, I started really being fascinated and thinking, well, people need to know about this. So I'm part of a group, a business group called Young Presidents Organization, or YPO. And I mentioned something to one of the leaders at YPO, and they said, well, why don't you come talk to us about that? And so I did kind of a fireside chat, and I said, here's the parts of your brain, here's what they do, and here's how you can change them. And a couple of guys came up to me and said, hey, can you come talk to my company about that? And, a couple of years later, I'm talking at eBay and Motorola and IBM and, all these places who are really interested in how they can create a culture of courage, how they can, break the rules that might have been traditional, how they can deal with conflict. And now what I've been doing, literally 3 or 4 times a week, Michelle, is doing just what we're doing, but to 50, 75, couple hundred people to help them deal, particularly now, with uncertainty.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think that is so important, especially, I think anxiety has always been an issue, and now it's just heightened so much. Now, when you talk about, you felt it was so important to share, like when we talk on the podcast, we discuss like, what's your why? Why do you think that was so important for you?
I think it was important for me because I came from an entrepreneur's background. So I started 4 companies, and I saw such a dramatic difference between my first company, when I was afraid of everything and I was constantly in a state of stress and a state of fear, and therefore my employees were as well, and it was very high performing in certain aspects, but it was very dysfunctional in others. And I thought, with one keynote speech, I could literally change the direction of a whole company, or I literally could change certainly a lot of individuals within that company once they understand what we can do and how we can actually reprogram our brain. So for me, my real why is to create world peace, because I think if we all learn about fear, we all understand what's going on in our mind, we all create this sense of courage, and can go into anything from a negotiation to a conflict resolution to voting with the idea of curiosity, not judgment. Then all of a sudden, a lot of these things that cause strife and pain within the world all go away. So my why is to help millions of people learn courage, because their life will change dramatically. And almost everything we do from a neuroscience perspective is self-serving, because we've evolved as a mechanism that is here to take care of ourselves. But the really cool thing is, if we can do something altruistic, we can do something in the service of other people, we get a little kick, we get a little dopamine hit, we get a surge, and that makes us better. And then our future past, which is something neuroscientists refer to as how we can restructure our brain, then how we fall back on these subconscious decisions becomes even more powerful. So when we're doing these things in service of other people, it feels really good, and it ends up being really good for us.
Yes. That's so funny. My sister picks on me because whenever the what do you want for Christmas? And I'll be like, oh, peace on earth. And they're like, we can think of something, but you're literally like, this is a good way to provide it. This will be my little ripple effect.
That's it. If we can reach millions of people, and that's the whole point of the book. I spent 6 years writing it, and I've given up the entrepreneurial and the startup stuff, and which is a lot more lucrative, but a heck of a lot less impactful. I think one book and a bunch of these podcasts, being with folks like you who are reaching a lot more people, and we can change a lot of people by doing something like this.
I think so, for sure. And you just mentioned curiosity and not having judgment. We talk about that as far as like, even for ourselves, like not blaming others, and not when we're looking to make changes. Why do you think that's so important, curiosity, and going into looking at your life without the judgment?
Well, it's very easy for us to fall back on judgment. It's very easy for us to say what we know is the right way. And in fact, what we know is probably the only way in a lot of people's mind. And what that does is that allows us, having that sense of almost selfishness, or certainly a sense of judgment, allows our brain to be paradoxically very efficient, because we're always using the same neurons, we're always using the same synapses, the same small area of the brain. And so consequently, the brain, which is the most energy hungry organ in our body, it makes up less than 5% of our body, but it uses 20% of the energy. So it's constantly looking for shortcuts. It's constantly looking for ways to make things easier, to use less energy. What that does is it preserves us as a organism, as a human being. But what it doesn't do is open us up to new possibilities. Yeah. So our area of possibilities, our whole realm, is limited when we aren't curious. And that's the really messed up thing about the way the brain works, is it's a prediction engine. So we're constantly trying to predict the outcome of a current situation. And that's why coronavirus is so challenging. I can talk more about that in a second. But one of the things that happens is when we try to predict something subconsciously, we fall back on all of our prior beliefs. And those prior beliefs are experiences we've had. So things that have happened in the past. Oftentimes, most of those experiences were put there by someone else.
Yes.
So we don't choose where we're born. We don't choose the color of our skin. We don't choose the language we speak. We don't choose how many brothers and sisters we have, what kind of a house we live in. All of that's chosen for us, yet all of those things go into creating our initial perspective on the world. So if we aren't curious, if we think that's the way the world should be, that's how people are, this is what my tribe's like, then we're very close to any possibility. And that means we're also close to innovation, to creativity, to happiness, and really at the end of the day, to good relationships, because that gets into parenting, it gets into love and everything else. If you believe that your way of doing it is the only way of doing it, you're shutting out a lot of potential and a lot of opportunity.
Right. And when you talk about new opportunities, one of the things that we discuss is, like you said, who you are now and who you think you maybe want to be or try something. And what I call it is that in between, the river of misery, where it's like so uncomfortable because it's not what you know, it's different. Would you say that's similar to your free energy? And can you explain that?
Yeah, so free energy is actually the root of all fear. And free energy is, to put it in context, it's something by one of the most brilliant neuroscientists and doctors in the world, a guy named Carl Friston from University College London. And he's an amazing guy. He was on the cover of Wired magazine last year. And you've got billionaires who fly over to see him literally for half an hour because they think he's got the key to developing artificial intelligence that really works. Wow. And the guys who made Siri and Alexa have consulted with him. So super smart guy. And what he thinks is and what he's proven is this thing called the free energy principle, which encompasses everything that happens to us. So what it says is basically we have prior beliefs based on our past. Those prior beliefs will predict the outcome of the current situation that you're in, and they'll give each possible outcome a weighting. So for instance, if you walk in and you flip a switch, your brain is automatically going into prediction mode. So it's saying that there's a 90% chance that the light's going to come on. There's a 10% chance that it's not going to come on. And if you live in a house with a shag carpet, maybe it's an 8% chance it's not going to come on and a 2% chance you'll get shocked, right? So so your brain goes through all these predictions. And what happens if you flick that light switch and water comes gushing down out of the ceiling, that's something you didn't predict. And that produces a lot of free energy. And free energy is the disconnect between what's actually happened and all the things that you predicted or that you thought were possible to happen. And so free energy is a way of describing surprise, uncertainty, that area you said in between where you are and where you want to be. And that's the best area you can stay in. I talked to a neuroscientist this morning on my Instagram site. We did a live chat with a neuroscientist named Bo Lotto, and Bo's got this group called the Lab of Misfits, and he works with Cirque du Soleil and all these other things. Oh, wow. He's done 3 main stage TED Talks. So amazing guy. And what Bo says, I love the way he describes it. He said, a lot of people think they can go from A to B, and they see people who are going from A to B and being super creative and saying, I could never be that creative. I could never go from A to B. And he's right. And his point is that you don't go from A to B. You go first from A to not A. And then you can start to find the steps along the way. And not A is very uncomfortable because it's in an area of uncertainty. And this is actually what's happening right now with the coronavirus.
Okay.
So one of the reasons there's so much anxiety is we're sitting here trying to predict this state that everybody's in right now. And we don't have a reference point. There's nothing in most of our prior beliefs where we can fall back on and say, this is the likely outcome. So because there's no reference point for that, we're producing a lot of free energy. And the emotion that creates is disempowerment. So when we feel disempowered because of this uncertainty and because we can't do anything immediately about the uncertainty, then that feeling of disempowerment changes our personality. And in the book, you notice I in Fear is Fuel, I laid out 9 different personality types. And you can have a personality, and there's a bunch of ways that you can pick those. And Myers-Briggs is one, and the Enneagram is another one. And I put them in TV personalities or movie personalities to make them a little bit easier to relate to. And our personality can be great and have a lot of strengths and weaknesses, but each one of those has a dark side, a shadow side. When you become disempowered because of uncertainty, you fall towards those shadow sides. You fall back, you default to your defense. So if you're a conservative, you become more conservative. If you're a liberal, you become more liberal. If you fall back into any one of those defenses, you start to think that that's the only way to be and everybody else is wrong, and that can drive anger and frustration and everything else. And that's where a lot of people are right now.
And is that also going back to like what you know most solidly as your prior beliefs? Like that's why you just, because it's easy again, it's that unconscious, like going back easy.
That's exactly right. You go back to that dark side because you spent the first 20 years of your life defaulting to defense. So we have that small gland in the base of your brain called the amygdala, and that amygdala is fully developed at birth. So we come out of the womb with the ability to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves, to have the fight, flight, or freeze response. So that's what I say, we default to defense. And we spend the first 20 years of our life habituating that reaction because the prefrontal cortex, the part that has the adult supervision that allows us to make choices, to plan ahead, to decide what we want to do, that's not fully developed until our early 20s. So consequently, because of that, we default to defense. Anytime we get in an uncertain or a stressful situation, if we haven't trained the neurons in our prefrontal cortex to shut off that amygdala, to shut off that survival instinct, and we haven't reprogrammed that 2 million-year-old piece of software sitting on the amygdala, then we fall back, we default to that defense, and it's not pretty.
Yes, that is all the work that we work on. And it's so funny because my sister's like, if I hear you say prefrontal cortex one more time, I'm like, it's so important. You need to understand this. Now, you also talk about feeling disempowered in this time, but in the book, you talk about the importance of taking responsibility for your life and being the producer of your life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think, one of the things we say in the book is that there's only 2 ways in life that we make decisions. We either make them out of fear or we make them out of opportunity. When you make a decision out of fear, it always leads to regret, to sadness, to shame, to failure. You make a decision out of opportunity, it always leads to growth and usually happiness and success and fulfillment. So you can recognize that by the changes in your body. You also have 2 ways of being that tie in very closely to that. And that can be that you're the author of your life, or you can be a victim. And I love the way that there's a woman named Diana Chapman at the Conscious Leadership Group who worked with a group of mine for about 6 years. And what she describes it as is the drama triangle, which I love. And you're on the drama triangle when you're a victim. And you see this literally, Michelle, in probably 80%, 90% of people in the United States. They're victims. Right? I'm sorry, I would have been on time, but the traffic was bad. Oh, we didn't get that deal because the customer was a jerk. Oh, I didn't get the raise because my boss is an ass. Right?
That's how I started with this. Well, not that my boss was an ass, but the part of I thought my job controlled me. Like I had no control of my time. It was the job's fault. And that's when I started coaching. Yeah.
That's the victim mindset. So if you're a victim, if you're sitting up here, then there's always a villain. And the villain is someone who you've got to blame it on. It's the boss, it's the customer, it's your coworker, it's your husband, it's your wife. It doesn't matter, but there's always a victim. And to get out of it, you need a hero to come save you because you aren't good enough to save yourself. So that's the drama triangle. And you can hear that, and it's easy to fall back on that. It's easy to become a victim and life happens to you. What we want to get to in the area of growth and happiness is when life happens by you. And that's when you change from being a victim to being a creator. And when you're a creator, now all of a sudden that person who's pushing you, that person who's maybe difficult, that person who isn't maybe the way you want him to be, he's not a villain. He's challenging you. He's challenging you to learn something, or she's challenging you to get better. It doesn't matter what it is, but they go from a villain to a challenger. And sometimes you do need help. And of course, you said it a couple of times already. When you need help, they're not going to solve the problem. And I always tell the analogy that that they're not going to get in the boat and row it for you, but that's your coach. And your coach can stand on the sidelines and look at what you're doing wrong and look at what you can do better. So that changes from getting off that drama triangle to becoming the creator of your own life. And if you can catch yourself blaming other people and finding, fault in other folks and looking at people judgmentally, then you're probably on that drama triangle. And one of the best things you can do, and it's actually pretty fun if you end up doing it with a partner or a spouse or work folks, is literally lay out 3 pieces of paper, one that says villain, one that says victim, and one that says hero. And then you tell a story about what happened. Well, I was supposed to do this podcast with Michelle and she was late. So now you're standing on the victim. And Michelle called me and she emailed me and she was such a jerk. So now you stand on the villain, right? And then you say, but her dog ended up coming in and reminding her that she had this thing. So the dog's the hero. So you can actually do that. It's pretty fun to go through kind of exaggerating the roles, but it helps you realize, I really am being the victim and I'm not taking accountability. I'm not writing the script of my life. I'm letting someone else write it for me.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Oftentimes I'll try to ask myself, how am I responsible for this? Like no matter what it is, because then I have the power if I'm responsible to make the changes.
That's a great point, Michelle. And one of the things that I'll often tell, especially my kids, I've got 3 teenagers, and my daughter just had someone on Instagram that she got in a little spout with, and she said, well, you're making me feel, or you made me feel, what was the word she used? I can't remember what it was, or you made me look bad, right? Or something like that. And I said, Shannon, nobody can make you look bad. Nobody can make you feel bad unless you give them permission to.
Yes.
If you're gonna relinquish your power and let them feel bad, I said, would you feel bad if I told you, you were really stupid, compared to if someone you didn't even know, who never even met you, came up and said, hey, you're really stupid. And you said, well, yeah, probably because I know you, I respect you and everything else, but then you're letting me. Why didn't that other person using the same words have any impact on you? And so just thinking like that, knowing that if you give up the power, or you could just keep it, like we were saying earlier, in curiosity and say, I wonder why that person thinks I'm stupid, or I wonder why they think I'm selfish. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something I can learn from that, or maybe they're just having a bad day.
Right. Like, what do I make it mean?
Yeah. And it totally changes the perspective.
That's so great. Now, you also, I think a good place to end when you were just talking about happiness and creating your life. How about the information on smiling and how important that is? That was so funny that we both talked about it.
Here, I've got a pen. I'll show you.
Okay.
So this is, a lot of people ask about what you can do now. So a lot of the companies that I'm working with, I'm doing these virtual keynotes. And I just did one for Toyota and Acura and everything else. And I said, look, there's 2 things you can do immediately. And the first thing is to breathe. And I recommend if you go on my site or on my YouTube channel or on Instagram or whatever, you can see
we'll hook all that up in the notes too, for sure.
Perfect. My morning routine, I've got five things that I do every morning, and it's part of a routine. The first thing I do is thank God that I woke up and I'm alive, and just have a little gratitude for being there. And you can thank Buddha, thank the universe, it doesn't matter, but just having that sense of gratitude that another day is starting and you woke up. Exactly. So that's the first thing. But the second thing I do is breathe. And I do a breathing practice in the morning and I do one at night. And the one that I introduce in the book as part of the BASE method, the platform for reprogramming your brain, is a 4x4. So you breathe in for a count of 4, you hold it for a count of 4, then out for a count of 4, then you hold it out for a count of 4, and start all over again. And that breathing methodology immediately signals to your sympathetic nervous system that we're not under threat. So the amygdala was wrong. It made a mistake. We don't have to have this fear response. That's the first thing that happens. So just breathing. And if you practice that in the morning, even if you practice it for 5 minutes, a lot of people get intimidated by meditation or breath work because they think, I don't have an hour to sit on a cushion.
I don't have time for that. That was me. But now I agree with you. It's a necessity.
it's a necessity, and it's something you can just do for 5 minutes, or even 2 minutes. If you just do 2 minutes of those 4x4s and only focus and only think about your breath, literally in 3 days, neuroscience research shows that it'll reprogram your brain starting in 3 days, just from simple breath work. So that's the first thing to do anytime you get stressed. The other thing is so simple, and it blew my mind the first time I heard about it, but we've got 42 muscles in our face. And Emory University did this great study where they brought in a couple hundred participants in the study, and they split the group in half. The control group sat there watching horror films and having their brain scanned and their cortisol level. Cortisol is the stress hormone. Having the cortisol level tested and the brain scanned as they watched, Friday the 13th or whatever. And they had a second group, and what they were trying to test out is the old adage of grin and bear it, and smile and you'll get through it type of thing. But they didn't want to tell the participants to smile. So they thought, well, what can we do? So they gave them all a chopstick, and they said, hold the chopstick in your mouth, because to hold the chopstick in your mouth, you've got to flex those 42 muscles. And what they found was just by smiling, just by flexing those muscles, even if you didn't mean it, you reduced your cortisol by 80%.
Wow.
So it's just that amazing thing. And now what I see, and I've done this a bunch of times on social media, I'm here in Boston, and I go out for a run or a walk after dinner or whatever, and I see a lot of people, and a lot of people are kind of, like that. And if you just smile at other people, their reflexive action is to smile back. And most of the time, you're going to produce a lot of the hormones that shut down the cortisol and that increase things like dopamine and oxytocin and all the things that happen when we've got that good feelings, that community feelings, and you're going to incite that in them as well. So smiling's a great thing to do, especially now in these times.
That is for sure. And I think it takes courage in these times for people to smile.
Sure does. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are, so afraid and uncertain, like they're falling back into that dark area I talked about. And they think, well, their primitive brain, that 2 million-year-old piece of software, is saying this person might be a threat.
Yes.
So I don't know if I want to smile at them, but
right.
If you've got the courage to smile, then it definitely has a contagious effect.
I agree. And I think that the other thing is, people are like, I'm afraid we're going to die. I'm like, we always were. Why don't we live until that day? Right. Like,
yeah. Well, as you know, Michelle, in my email signature, it says memento mori, which is remember your death. Yes. And the first part of it is, I always tell people to live big, but remember your death. We're going to die someday. So spend your moments wisely, use your happiness, use your power, use everything that you have to help other people, and it's going to make you feel better. And it's not just, an old adage that says that. It's neuroscience that proves all of these things. And that's the fascinating thing about the book and some of the things that, I present. It's all based on hard science. It's not just someone thinking, this seems like a good idea.
Yeah, it was so great. And I think everyone, you need to go out and get it. There's so many, I could sit and talk to you for like so many more hours. There's so much information in here that's so fascinating. So thank you so much. Before we go though, how is the best way for people to follow you and get in touch with you?
Well, the website, pjsweeney.com, and we're SWEENEY, and we're in the process of doing a new makeover, which is pretty exciting. On Instagram, it's The Fear Guru, and Facebook is Patrick Sweeney Fear Guru as well, and then Twitter is just PJ Sweeney. So any of those ways people can reach me. Also on LinkedIn, obviously, is Patrick Sweeney as well. And if you go to pjsweeney.com, you can sign up for our newsletter, and we put something out, usually a new blog or video once a month, and then we'll give updates on the Instagram live things, which we're now we're doing about once a week with some really interesting people now that a lot of less travel out there and a lot of people have some time available. So it's a really great opportunity to now, see how we can help other people while we're locked down and have some time on our hands.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate this. This has been so much fun.
Michelle, likewise. Thank you. It's been great talking to you, and thanks for getting me on the show, and thank everybody, especially I appreciate you taking the time to tune in and listen to the podcast.
Thank you.
Okay. Wasn't that great? This book
has so much goodness in it. And here's the other thing, the fun part about going back to reread books is that you, as the reader, have changed since the first time that you read a book, and oftentimes you pick up new things about it. I am getting ready to reread this book. It's so funny. I do literally have so many things underlined and starred, and I'm really curious to see how that changes when I go back and read it now, because that was episode 80. We are now at 252. Can I tell you how much has changed? I probably don't need to. When we recorded that initially, we were in the middle of COVID. We were in lockdown. So a lot has changed. I encourage you to head out, get the book. Again, Fear is Fuel, The Surprising Power to Help You Find Purpose, Passion, and Performance. All right, that's what I have for you today. Let's meet back here next week. And in the meantime, make it a great day. Take care. Did you know you can take this work to a deeper level with me one-on-one? Go to michelleburkecoaching.com and click on Get Started to begin.